Hey all, today we are looking at Isaiah chapters 9 through 12. And today's subject, as we get into the prophets, is the language of hyperbole. The language of hyperbole. This is a common feature, not just in the prophetic writings, but in lots of different places throughout the Bible. And that is, the Bible often uses the language of hyperbole to express certain ideas. If you're unaware what a hyperbole is, it is basically a way of saying things that seem to go above and beyond what may have actually happened. A way to express something sort of in extreme terms. And so in Isaiah chapters 9 and 10, you may notice that God is not really happy with the people of Israel. So Isaiah is directing his some words of warning to the people of Israel for various different things. And the language that he uses is that even when God does this one thing to sort of execute his judgment over Israel, still his anger is still there. His hand is still upraised is the key repeated phrase, that God is still angry. And it goes on to describe all these things that God is going to do to these unrepentant people who have turned away from him, who are abusing one another, and who are just worshiping other gods and all of these things. There's even one line in there that talks about how God is going to basically take away anything from the people that allows them to function in a normal manner, where he talks about how he's going to clear all the forest, and that even a child is going to be able to count on their hand how many forests are left in the world. There's another line that talks about how he is going to starve the people so that they have nothing to turn to but eat themselves. And so Isaiah uses this really extreme language, which is known as hyperbole. And so the question is, why does God use this sort of language? Why do the prophets use this sort of language? Is that really true? Did God clear all the forest? Did God starve the people so that they were forced to eat other people, to be cannibals? Well, the easy and obvious answer is no. That didn't happen. That didn't happen. Which then, for some of us, may raise a question like, well, is the Bible not accurately reporting events? Is the Bible lying? Is the Bible making up stuff that just didn't happen? And if so, does that mean that we can't trust it? These are all good questions to ask. However, as we always talk about here at Nazarene Baptist Church, it's always important to know the context and genre of whatever we're reading in the Bible. So we can't read one section of the Bible and say that this is how you read every section of the Bible, because that's not how it works. Because the Bible is made up of all kinds of different genres, written at different periods of time to different communities, using different sort of language and style and metaphor. And so we have to understand how each part of the Bible works differently. So when we look at a passage that says, for example, when Jesus says, if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out, and if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Now, Christians for centuries have been reading that passage to understand that Jesus didn't really mean that. Because if he did, well, there would be a lot of Christians walking around with one or no eyeballs or one or no hands. And so we automatically, in our brain, make the decision that, well, Jesus must be using sort of figurative language. And why does he do that? Well, he does it to make a point. Jesus doesn't actually want us to cut off our hands or our eyes, but he wants us to take such extreme action when we are sinning that we get rid of the thing that is causing us to turn against God. And that's what he means. And so the same thing is happening in the prophets. So when God says that he's going to starve the people so that they're forced to eat one another, or everything's going to be laid waste and there's going to be nothing left, Well, this is the same sort of thing that God is trying to communicate. It's using this genre called hyperbole. And the purpose of hyperbole, just like Jesus' reference to the gouging out your eyes or cutting off your hand, is to use extreme language to get someone's attention. In this case, the prophets, and Isaiah is just one of many. Many have come before him, many came after him, who again were speaking God's truth and trying to get people's attention, but they refused to listen. They rejected and killed the prophets. And so these prophets, God used them to go to extreme measures, using as vivid language as they could possibly conjure up to say how dire the situation was and how bad it was going to be for them if they continued to reject God and rely on themselves and these other things to be God for them, that it is not going to go well. And so this language gets used in a way to get our attention. And so the question for those people then and us now is, when we read these difficult sort of passages, are we paying attention to? Are we listening? Do we understand that life without God is meaningless and pointless, and that if we don't follow God, well, it's not going to end well? So turn back to God. And this is the other side of the coin that we see, how God uses this hyperbole. In chapters 11 and 12 of Isaiah, we kind of have the opposite use of it, where the lion and the lamb are lying down together, where a kid will stick his hand into a viper's nest and not worry about getting bitten. That when the prophet foresees that when we actually do listen to God, when we pay attention to the things that he says, well, it's the opposite. Things are going to be so good that are going to be beyond description. The things that we thought would be impossible are going to be possible. And so again, as we read through these prophets, this is kind of our lesson today, to understand the language and genre that gets used, and to ask ourselves as we're reading this, not to pay attention to necessarily to the intricate details of whether this is or is not going to happen exactly how the prophet is describing it, but to understand something serious is going on here, and the prophet is working seriously hard to get our attention. And so, like always, the question remains, are you paying attention? Well, we'll see you next time. Bye.